Good afternoon. This afternoon, I would like to talk a little bit briefly about how to have success in doing God's plan for your life. And I'd like to do it in a little bit different way. I would like to use the book of Jonah as the basis. So let's look at Jonah right now. The English Standard Version, ESV, here you can see that Jesus, and we'll look at it shortly, Jesus refers to him as a real person. So let's, before we go into the book of Jonah itself, let's look at the book of Matthew. Matthew 12, 38 through 40. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So you can see that Jesus refers to Jonah as a real person. What can we take from this? Some of the things that we can utilize or envision to have a success in doing God's plan for us. I think the first one would be to listen and obey when God speaks to us. Let's go now to the book of Jonah, to Jonah chapter 1, and look at verses 1 and 2. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. He spoke very clearly. God told Jonah to preach to Nineveh. It was the most important city in Assyria. It was the world's rising power in Jonah's day. Jonah doesn't say very much about Nineveh's wickedness, but the prophet Nahum gives us more insight. Nahum says that Nineveh was guilty of plots against God, exploitation of the helpless, cruelty and war, idolatry, prostitution, and witchcraft. God told Jonah to go to Nineveh, to warn of judgment, and to declare to the people that they could receive mercy and forgiveness if they repented. What did Jonah do? Well, verse 3 tells us. It says, But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Jonah ran away. Remember, we just talked about listening when God speaks to us. God speaks to us in various ways. And the first one, I think the most obvious, is His Word. He gives us written instructions. He gives us warnings, commandments, promises, encouragement. He also speaks to us through circumstances. He opens and closes doors, and He gives us correction. We have people that we encounter in our life. We're taught, we're corrected, we're edified. So there's multiple ways that we receive God's instructions. He instructs us through His creation. We see His power, His majesty, His love, certainly, His humor, I like that one, provision for us. And we also receive instruction and His Word and His will through prayer. We receive messages in our inner being, don't we? We certainly need to learn, as Jonah did, do not run from God's instruction. The word John, in the book of John 15:4, the word tells us, Ye are my friends, if ye do whatsoever I command you. And in James 1:22, Be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. I think point number 2 would be perhaps to quit trying to be a face in the crowd, and I'll explain. We act unaware. I didn't know there was a need for eckies. We act unconcerned. It's not my problem. I don't need or I don't care enough to, whatever. We act unconvinced. I do not believe it. I don't believe it, so I shouldn't do anything. And because of this, we miss opportunities. We then have a breakdown in the kingdom building process when God's people refuse to be involved in God's work. So many of God's people, I guess we could say, are on strike due to misconceptions about their ministry. Speaking of serving God, we will always make mistakes. We will always find more that needs to be done than we can ever accomplish. But our best is all that God expects. Well, what did Jonah do to get back on track? First, he turned to prayer, and so should we. In Jonah 2:1, let's take a look at that. It says, "Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice." So he turned to prayer. He acknowledged what he had done, and so do we need to do that same thing. He said, "I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and you heard my voice." Well, I know that at times I tend to complicate things when they're not complicated. I believe the answer to having success in doing God's plan is not complicated. We just need to follow perhaps these 4 basic steps that I previously outlined. Listen and obey when God speaks. Do not run from God's instruction. Quit trying to be a face in the crowd. And finally, turn to God in prayer. God bless and have a great afternoon.